Hi, my name is Lori, and I'm an alcoholic. And I've been through this process with an amazing and loving God, a loving sponsor who was patient with me and do practice 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. Kathy, thank you for asking me to speak. It's so funny that we're on fear, and I always get anxious, having to come up here and speak, and that's just a natural thing. I'm human, but today I invite God in now. I don't let this fear own me and control me anymore like it once did my entire life. I think every decision I made in my life was based on fear. As I, go further along through this work and see how it just owned me. I'm not going to talk much about my drinking because we're not on step one, and I was, taught when I got through this process. Now we talk about the solution and not the problem, and but I will tell you what I do. We all know how to drink and drug, but I will tell you what what I just feel like, my entire life I was pretty much suffering my entire life, even as a young girl. I knew right from the get-go. At age 11, I found my out, and it was pot. And I loved my marijuana, and I couldn't get enough of it. And I really, did that on a daily basis for many, many years. So even as a young girl, I never felt okay. My self-esteem was never really where it was at. Never felt good enough. Didn't educate myself because I wasn't smart enough. And so my self-esteem was always in the tubes. It really was. And that actually progressively got worse as my drinking career escalated as well. So I always felt like, I just lived in that self-imposed prison, and it's not a pretty place. There's no way I was getting out and no way anyone was getting in. I was always isolated, I was always a loner. And, I was always running from things, always running, I was always a runner, I didn't like dealing, I didn't like failing, I wasn't going to deal with any pain, I wasn't going to deal with any problems, and I always just looked for another solution other than God. So, moving forward, I married an alcoholic because I know how to pick them. I was good at picking out boyfriends, let me tell you. And, and actually he was the love of my life. And but long story short, he died from alcoholism 6 years ago. We have 3 beautiful sons. 2 of them have this illness, mentally, physically, and spiritually. We suffer from this disease threefold, and mentally, physically, and spiritually. It has a ripple effect, and my children are also affected mentally, physically, and spiritually. So, I will just move along to just tell you in the end of my drinking, I picked up other substances after my third son, and then things became daily once again, and it is a progressive illness. You pick up where you left off, and there was never enough for me. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that mental obsession. When am I going to do it? How much and when? And from the time I opened up my eyeballs, I wasn't even thinking about, how I was going to, deal with my children. I got to the point where I crossed the line with my addiction, because I did live and breathe for my husband and my children. Family was everything to me, but again, this is a progressive illness, and, it becomes paramount. My children are not a priority. My job's not a priority. My illness becomes paramount. When I looked up that word paramount, in the doctor's opinion, it means superior power and influence. And I still look up words today, because my vocabulary was very limited when I got here. It was up yours or I started swinging. I had no coping skills, and, again, because I just didn't know how to deal. I didn't, we have those 3 basic instincts in life: social, economic, and sex. And this illness is booze is the great remover. I didn't know how to communicate when I got here. My sex life was all screwed up, and, my plumbing was all messed up. I didn't know how to, it was just a disaster, every which way. And, so the end of my drinking, pretty much, I couldn't be a mother to my kids. I couldn't be a wife, a daughter. I couldn't be any of those things. And in the end of my drinking, I remember going, if you're up there, please do something with me, and I'll never turn my back on you. I really kind of admitted step one, like I admitted complete defeat, because I was trying to beat my alcoholism, because I'm a strong girl. My alcoholism beat me into the ground, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't drink like normal people. I didn't know that I had a physical allergy to substances, So that's why I was baffled, one of the baffling features of alcoholism. And so I just went on to the bitter end. I was losing, my family was all done with me. I know I caused a great deal of shame to my children, my husband. I was unemployable. I couldn't hold a job for 5 years. I was unemployed. I had 2 homes, that pretty much really should have, we saved one of them, and that was just a miracle in itself. But even the finance guy told me, he says, we got to pull a lot of strings to save this. He says, I don't know if I can do it. And it was because I was collecting my rents, and then I would collect my rents, and I would go down the bar and pay my tab, that I owed for that month, and then run it up again, so every month I'd be collecting my rents and paying off my tab, because you don't bite the hand that feeds you. So I made sure that tab was paid, so this is where my drinking took me. And so it was at that point, booze and drugs couldn't fix me anymore. It was like just going into an empty well. I was like going out into thin air. Anything I put in my mouth, down my throat, in my arm, I went out into thin air. I was all done. And so I was pretty much beat down and mangled. I was just existing at this point. And I didn't think there was a way out because I did many detoxes. And every time I got out of a detox, I drank. And the reason why I drank was because I didn't like me. And I hated who I become. But if I had to sit and be still, I'd have to look at me. And that was too painful. I couldn't handle looking at me. So again, not wanting to deal or feel with anything. So as soon as I got out of a detox, I drank. And I thought if I could just maintain, I'll be fine. But, if you're a good alcoholic, there's no such thing as control drinking. At some point in your drinking career, you lose control, and that was my case. So I ended up in a halfway house, and I was there for like 8 months. I told myself, this is where my thinking was. This is, I'm just going to stay here a month. I just got to put the plug in the jug, and I'll have this licked, right? So this is where my thinking is, right? So, anyways, long story short, I ended up staying there for 8 months, and it was the best thing I ever did in my whole life, and I haven't had a drink since then in 2003. And it was on Thanksgiving. And, so I stayed in that program for 8 months. It was time for me to go, and I never knew what fear was. Like I said, it was up yours or I started swinging. I had no fear, So when I got sober, I'm paralyzed with this fear now, and I couldn't understand why I was so scared. And it was overwhelming for me. I didn't even want to walk out my door, out of that halfway house. I hated even going out into society. My heart would be racing 24/7. I had to be out in the real world, and I thought the big world was going to chew me up and spit me out, seriously. It wasn't, getting sober was the hardest thing I ever did in my whole life, and it was only because pain had always been a motivator. The pain had to be great enough for me to actually get through that and have the willingness to keep that desire to not pick up a drink. And God was carrying me because I wanted to drink every day, trust and believe that. But I knew it couldn't fix me anymore. And so the fear was just really, I was getting really paralyzed with it. I didn't want to leave my house. I was still isolated. I was attending meetings 7 days a week, though. I was chasing meetings like I was chasing that drink, let me tell you. Because it was the only place I got peace of mind. It was the only time my mind got quiet. And then when I walked back out that door, my mind be racing again. So I went through this day after day for almost 2 years, 7 days a week. If I could get into a meeting twice a day, I was there. I had to work too. But I was chasing meetings. I didn't have a car. I was walking 2 miles at times to get to a meeting. And part of that, too, was because I couldn't stand sitting with myself. So I'd rather be doing something else than, of course, looking at Lori. So a lot of times my motives weren't even pure with going to meetings. So basically, I had 2 years of sobriety. I'm out of town. I was taking my family in doses because I had no acceptance or anything with people, places, and things. I was a fistful of rage. I thought if just one thing was going to set me off, and I never been to jail, and that's a yet, but one thing would have set me off, and I would have started punching somebody because the pain. I don't suffer well. Early in my sobriety, I didn't suffer well. Trust and believe that. And so I pretty much stayed isolated from that too. And I remember my sponsor telling me, she says, somebody with that much anger has got that much fear. Now, I didn't know what she meant at the time, but now I can see how that fear, just how I was riddled with it when I got sober, never feeling that emotion ever. So at 2 years of sobriety, I got on my knees. I'm doing meetings 7 days a week, and I said, God, please don't put anyone in my life that I can cause any harm to. I said, because I'm checking out and I'm taking somebody with me. And that's where I was at, because when I'm in pain, I want you to feel that pain. That's how I released my pain. And it was shortly, not long after that, God put an amazing woman in my life, and she began, getting me through this process. And I will tell you, there are so many ways of doing these steps out there. And this format, when we get to this fourth step, it's really, there's no more blame game here. There's no more playing the victim. Pour me another drink. I really, I had to memorize that third step prayer. And that is truly amazing. Not even knowing, that I was actually building a relationship with God. I was just taking the directions at the time. And so inviting God in, it's a real powerful prayer. When we begin, especially doing this work, we need to invite him in, because we learn to invite him in on everything that we do today. And this was the beginning of that process, with inviting him in for the very first time, because I was self-will run riot to the extreme. And I didn't, need anyone's help, and I solved things all on my own, So when I began doing this writing, and it's interesting, because when we do have to write out the resentments, on the left side of that column, we have to write the effects. And the effects, our sponsor gives us a list of those effects. But mine, I had on every single resentment, was personal relationships, self-esteem, and fear, and emotional security. Fear had to be on every one of those resentments, no matter what. Self-esteem basically is that fear turned inside out, really. But so I had those 4 on every single one of my resentments. And still not understanding any of this, I'm just following the directions, and I was just very mechanical. I mean, I was in so much pain. I didn't even like looking at myself writing, It was very painful for me. And so basically, writing down the effects was the beginning of kind of just looking at those fears. And then, of course, when we turn it around, we have to look at that fear again. So we're basically looking at, already acknowledging 2 fears here before we even get to the fear part, and the other fear, where was I fearful with all of that, with the resentments, basically how I interpret that fear with my resentment. And that, I thought after the turnarounds, hallelujah, I'm past this flipping turnaround, right? I thought it was going to be a little easier now by the time I got to the fear. I'm like, there's got to be some light somewhere, because that turnaround wasn't pretty. And and it was funny, by the time I got to the fear, I struggled with that. I thought it was going to be something. I didn't know what to expect. But I will tell you, writing the fears was just as hard as the turnaround for me, because with the fears, and it's funny, right here it says something. Let me just touch on that real quick. What page did that begin? We begin on the fear. Referring to our list. Okay, notice the word fear is bracketed alongside this. All right. It says something that I wanted to touch on. Basically, we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, even though we had no resentment in connection with them. So, which means basically we're not taking any of those fears off our list. With using the fears they're talking about, when we have to start making this list of those, like fears that we have, those debilitating fears. Fear, like on my fear list, I had, my son not returning from combat, I'm afraid of dying in a fire. I'm afraid of drowning. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to walk another woman through this process. I'm afraid, I'm not going to get this. I'm afraid I'm going to drink again. I mean, it says there's 100 forms of fear. I actually pulled some of those fears off my list, though. I did do that because I was such a ball of fear, and I still am, So I used any fear that was available, and it's amazing because we really, the fear is that evil and corroding thread, that fabric of our existence. Like I said, it would just owned me and controlled me all my life. And it says here on the next line, when we look at our fears, it's, when we get through our fears, he enables us to match calamity with serenity. You know what I mean? And so basically, we're going to deal with problems for the rest of our life. Calamity means sudden damage or distress. And so that means we're going to match calamity. I'm going to be able to handle those problems now because now, it says here, self-reliance failed us. They're already telling me what the problem is. Self-reliance failed us, right? So now we trust, infinite God rather than finite self. And it was through doing this 4-step, through my fear step, actually, I had a powerful, spiritual experience here. This is where I was really enlightened because I had to ask 3 questions, right? And the 3 questions: when did I first have this fear? Well, I had this fear when my, son went overseas. Why do I have this fear? And how would this fear be different if I trusted and relied upon God? That question killed me because I trusted and relied upon myself my whole life. So now I'm learning to trust, God was solving my problems for me. So that was, I got stumped on those questions. My fear section took me a long time, just like it did the turnarounds. And but it was pretty amazing because I'm a person with a thick skull. It takes a lot to get through to me. And it was so doing this, writing out how would this fear be different if I trusted and relied upon God. After doing it 50 times, you think he was trying to tell me something? Hello, right? So, and I was truly had a, I had part of experience here doing this part of the 4-step. The turnarounds I didn't get, the effects. But when I got here, and this is just only my experience, some people don't have their spiritual experience to the other side, but when I started getting towards the end of this fear, then I went to my sex conduct, and boom, it was happening for me, and I was just kind of writing, and it was like, God really, he saves the best for last, that sex conduct, right? So, I wasn't really so fearful when I got to that section. God was good, and when I was able to take a look at my motives and all of this and that, but the fear section was just, this here is so unbelievable. The fear just really was just, recently, I shared a story not too long ago, but, relating to fear, how it just really operates in my life on a daily basis because we've got that beautiful 10-step now, and it all relates to fear, all of my actions, all of my behaviors. I went to the store and I bought a Sunday Telegram. The paper was $4. I haven't bought a paper in years, right? And the papers that I used to get were this fat. So I'm in line. The paper's only this thick. So I'm already holding a resentment, thinking I got to pay $4 for it. I'm not even getting nothing in it, right? So I haven't even checked out yet, and I'm already holding a resentment, right? So I needed the flyers out of the paper. So of course, because I was looking for coupons, well, they had every flyer in there except for the ones I was looking for, right? So I'm like, what the hell? I was ready to bring back the newspaper, right? I want my $4 back, right? This is where my twisted ends was, right? So, and it was funny because, it's what I'm getting at, I guess, is that the woman in the store is not the problem. Newspaper's not the problem, I'm the problem. My anger is the problem, and it's all related to fear, and I guess, what I'm trying to say is that if my feelings are off, my thinking is off, and I need to correct it right away. And that's the beautiful part of doing that 10-step, that moment by moment check, Johnny on the spot stuff, because I did this for so long, doing all this writing is so ingrained in me now. On how to do a turnaround, But there have been times when the resentments also come up that are great, and I will write it out, no doubt, and share that with another alcoholic. And but primarily it's fear for me. Primarily it's always fear that just gets to me. So that 6-step. They talk about, I admitted everything was objectionable. I did. Everything that I saw in my 4th step, I did admit was objectionable. Those behaviors that I looked at in my 4th step, where I was just selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, and afraid, they didn't serve me. My behaviors did not serve me well, like a child kicking his feet, getting what you want and you get it, you know what I mean? Or when I was out there, I had placed myself in some less than desirable situations, and I did what I had to do to get what I wanted. That might have served me then, My kicking my feet might have served me well back then, but those behaviors don't serve me in sobriety. A woman, a 52-year-old woman in recovery. And, when I think about this, I think about those bedevilments on page 52, not, having a handle on my, my emotional, not being able to control my emotional something or other, it says, and, that feeling of uselessness and being a prey to misery. So by not having done this work, you know what I mean, I would have never been of service to anybody. I would still, I'd be sober, but my relationships, who knows where they would be at. Again, and looking through all of the self-seeking behaviors, how I always reacted, and, when I got hurt, I was used silent scorn. I mean, that's not going to benefit a healthy relationship. That's old behavior, you know what I mean? And it's about learning to communicate for me today. I didn't know how to communicate, but I do know, being in a relationship with my family, my coworkers, it's all about communication today. And that was one of the biggest things on my list. I was always afraid of not being heard. And I didn't understand that. And she pointed that out to me in my 5th step. And she said, Lori, it's about communication. And I was like, no wonder I was afraid of not being heard. So I would do whatever. I would react like a kid to get what I wanted so you would hear me. And, whether it be throwing a phone because I'd get pissed off, or, at the end of my drinking, I'd probably slap you. And you know what I mean? And it's like, so all of these unhealthy behaviors that, is, so I can only, my relationships today, I can clearly know wouldn't be where they're at. So, the physical allergy still exists with me. It's dormant, but because I practice those ladder steps, 10, 11, and 12, because I say spiritually fit, I have that freedom from that mental obsession, alcohol and drugs. The disease, my physical allergy will always be there, but if I step away from this process and, and continue, because it doesn't take long for that ego to step back right in. It comes back in quick, and I know because I've experienced it. It don't take long for that insanity to return. Believe me, this disease is sneaky and cunning and baffling, and if you stop working on yourself, it happens. Those steps 10, 11, and 12 are there for a reason. And if I'm not staying constant vigilant, and when I looked up the word vigilant, it means harmful to danger or something like that, meaning the disease. My selfishness, my dishonesty, and my fear, they're all going to crop back up again. That insanity returns, and then the drink. And step 10 pretty much lays that out for us. It gives us a few warning signs. We can't, rest on our laurels. It makes it real clear. It gives a few warning signs for sure on those pages. But the fear had always, dominated me. It ruled my thinking all the time, and I've had a shift in the change of the way I think and live today because of this process. Like sometimes I get so blown away as to where I'm at. Like step 3 talks about making a decision to turn our life and our will over, but basically you're turning your thinking over is what you're doing. When you make that decision to move forward, we learned it's the change in our thinking that shifts. And so basically when you think about step 3, you can think about making a decision to turn my thinking over, because it's my thinking that was broken. That is the main problem of the disease, And so steps 4 through 9 pretty much taught me, how to turn my life and my will over, and steps 10, 11, and 12, keep my life and my will turned over to God. And I don't do this perfectly by any means, but but I've got that 10 step. Thank God for that 10 step that I've got that. And again, that's moment to moment on a daily basis. And some people think I think a 10 step is for PM, but it's not. We have a PM inventory, and that's step 11. And so. I don't know. This process is I love this process, and I love the fact that we get to use an intercom here, whatever, and I wasn't for that before, but now I see how helpful it is. I live an hours away, and there's no big book step study process really out where I'm at, so I get to listen to this, download this on my way to work. This is by far the best thing anyone could ever come up with, was that process over that. And so I am so grateful, and thank you for asking me to speak, Kathy.